Hey guys, welcome back. Much appreciated you guys taking a little time out of your day to watch the video. And today we're going to do something a little different. Going to have a little fun video. I'm going to talk about who I think are the top 5 real bass anglers in the history of the sport. Sort of break that down for you guys a little bit. And yeah, I've been wanting to do this video for a while because, one of the things that I've noticed a trend here heavily the last year or so is that all the tournaments are getting won by, advanced technology. Most every tournament you see won now, these tournaments, they're trending towards the people winning the tournaments are blowing the tournament away, basically finding this obscure stuff with side imaging, down imaging, 360, live scope. They're finding, fish on shell beds. They're finding fish setting up on isolated rocks in 50 foot of water. They're finding fish suspended over 100 foot of water. They're finding isolated big fish just setting up on cover that, normally they don't get on. And, this type of fishing is dominating the sport and winning. And what I want to do is I want to sort of bring it back down to earth a little bit and tell you guys who I think are the top 5, best real bass fishermen out there that don't rely on that. And before I get into this, like I said, I know I have a lot of sensitive types that watch this channel. They get offended very easily. I'm not meaning any disrespect. If you're one of those dudes that have won tournaments, live scoping, good for you. I'm not dogging you for that. I'm just talking about the reality of the sport that we live in here. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is there's a big correlation with what I'm talking about with hunting. I know a lot of people hunt that watch this channel too. And in my opinion, the thing that makes a great hunter is the ability of a person to get close to its prey. And it's the same in bass fishing. I gauge the skill of a bass angler by their ability to get close to their prey. That's why most of the guys I'm talking about here in this list are flippers and pitchers. In order for you to be a good hunter and to get close to your prey, you have to understand stealth. You have to understand camouflage. You have to understand tracking. You have to understand the movements of an animal on an intimate level that goes well beyond the modern technology that hunters use with scopes and drones and trail cams and all that type of stuff. In essence, they're not, a lot of hunters today they're not hunters, they're killers in that sense. And what I'm talking about, I mean that in a sense that they've lost connection with their ability to get close to the animal. When you kill an animal up close and personal, it's a lot more intimate of experience. To experience the death of that creature, not from shooting it 400 yards away with a high-powered rifle and a scope. That's just killing at that point. And it's the same with fishing. In order to, in my opinion, the skill of an angler is measured by its ability to get close to its quarry, because in order to get close to its quarry and generate that strike, you have to have those same hunter abilities that go back thousands of years on an ancient, primal level. And it's sort of like I'll relate it a little bit today as far as, on a tournament sense. Before I get into the top 5 list here, I'll tie it back to baseball briefly. In 1927, Babe Ruth set the home run record of 60 home runs on a 154 game schedule. That lasted all the way until 1961, when Roger Maris beat it with 61 homers on a 162 game schedule. And then in 1990 something, Barry Bonds, who was a steroid pump, meat covered robot, hit 70 some home runs on a 162 game schedule. So in my opinion, Ruth's record was the record that stood the test of time, and the other two should have an asterisk next to it for beating the record, but they didn't beat it under the same set of conditions as Ruth did. And it's the same with bass fishing. I've talked about this before. A lot of people don't agree with me, but I think that bass tournament wins that are aided, heavily with electronics should have some type of an asterisk next to them versus the ones that are on a more pure primal level. Just my opinion. Like I said, you may agree with it. That may piss you off, but that's just sort of the way I see it anyway. So, okay, let's get into the top 5 here, what I'm talking about. Top 5 who I think are the greatest 5 real bass anglers that's ever existed. Now there's a lot that are close to it, but here's the top 5. Number 5, and I'll put it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The first guy I'll talk about is Guido Hidden. Everybody knows Guido, passed away a few years ago. Guido Hidden was one of the greatest anglers that ever existed in his ability to understand what it takes to get a bass to bite. And Guido was one of those anglers that fished up close and personal to the fish a lot. He was a master of sight fishing. He developed it before anyone else that was doing it. Won tournaments sight fishing back before anyone thought you could even catch fish doing that. A lot of his wins, classic win, Angler of the Year, was attributed to pitching and flipping a jig. And Guido had the ability to figure out how to get bass to bite that didn't want to bite. If there was a fish, if he thought there was a fish around a stump, he would tweak his bait, put on 50 different lures until he figured out how to catch that fish. I mean, he understood what it took for a bass to bite lures, because he spent a lot of times in the Ozark Hills up at Lake of the Ozarks, fishing for bass with crawdads and all that type of stuff. Just a really pure instinctual angler. So I got Guido at number 5. Number 4 is Dave Glebe. A lot of you guys may never heard of Dave Glebe. If you're a bass fishing historian, you've heard of Dave Glebe. He was a sort of a West Coast legend, won tons of tournaments in California in the 70s and 80s. Eventually he came out and fished the Bassmaster circuit for a couple of years, and I think he won 1 or 2 Bassmaster events with big weights flipping. I think he won like a tournament, Lake Okeechobee, came all the way from California and won an Okeechobee Bassmaster tournament with like 100 pounds flipping a jig before anyone else knew how to do that. Glebe was one of the most intuitive anglers that ever lived. And one of the stories I can tell you to sort of give you an idea about that was Rick Klein was sharing this story with me years ago. He said that he was fishing a tournament. I can't remember where it was, but Glebe was in the tournament. And the first day, Glebe was leading the tournament with a big weight. And I guess Rick went up to him and said, "Hey man, do you think your fish are gonna bite tomorrow? Do you think you can catch them?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know about those fish," but he said, "I'm gonna go." I looked at the map, and there was this place on the other side of the lake I've never been to before, and I just want to go check it out and see what's there. And Rick goes, "Well, so you're gonna go to a place that you've never seen before? You don't even know if there's any fish there?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, I just want to go see. I just want to go check it out, And I guess Glebe goes to this spot that he's never seen before, never fished for, didn't know anything about it, and wins the tournament instead of going back to the place where he caught the tournament leading the bag the first day. And you hear stories about Glebe all the time about there, how he was the most intuitive, instinctual, primal bass angler that ever lived. And he didn't gain the fame he would have, probably because he didn't want to, travel as much and, fish the tournaments out east there, but living in California, just the logistics probably kept him from it. But I think Dave Glebe is probably one of the greatest primal, real bass anglers that have ever existed, even though he hasn't got the notoriety for it that he has other than a small circle. Okay, number 2 and 3 is a tie. I'm going to put Tommy Biffle and Denny Brower as a tie as the 2 greatest real bass anglers, 2nd and 3rd place, for their ability of pitching and flipping. And just like I talked about before, about how I equate a great hunter to an angler being a great pitcher and flipper, Biffle and Brower took pitching and flipping to the next level. They were the ones where if there was any type of a pitching and flipping bite going on a lake, 95% of the guys in the tournament would miss it, and they would find it every single time. They had an understanding of what to look for in shallow water and how the bass were positioned on shallow water cover. They had it almost to a scientific level. They understood wind, they understood current, they understood color, they understood boat positioning, casting angles, the mood of the fish, what it took to generate the strike, when those fish were right in front of them in a bush or lay down in a dock, something like that. And all these guys that I'm talking about, arguably you could say that they could have had the same careers that they have had with no electronics whatsoever. These are true, real bass fishermen that use their instinctual, primal, hunter-gatherer ways to translate that into catching bass. So I put Denny Breyer, Tommy Biffle at second and third. And you guys, unless you fished around those two when they were at the top of their game, which I did, you know, this was back in the early 90s, it's hard to appreciate, you know, how they dominated when that technique existed. If that technique was predominant, say if there was a lake that had flooded cover in it, those guys were in the top 5 every single tournament, without a doubt. And even in some marginal tournaments where you didn't think there was much of a flip and bite going on, they'd figure it out. So highly impressive from that end. So number one, guys, the number one greatest real bass fisherman in the history of the sport is without a doubt Rick Klein. And not for the obvious reason. Rick Klein, I think he was named that by ESPN years ago. I'm not talking about Rick's wins and that type of stuff. I'm talking about Rick's approach to bass fishing. He's probably got more of a just a instinctual, primal awareness of bass and bass fishing than anybody ever had, especially when he was at the top of his game, you know, in the 80s and early 90s. It bordered on the surreal, you know, how aware he was on that. He was a trendsetter in so many different ways. One of the biggest contributions Klein made to the sport was his ability to understand how casting angles generated strikes from quality bass, not just bass, but from quality bass, and what it took to get those big fish to hit. He was one of the first guys to understand that multiple presentations could generate bites from sluggish, non-aggressive bass in shallow water. Again, most of Rick's wins and high finishes could be attributed to, you know, with no electronics. I fished with him at a Bassmaster tournament in 1988. The first time I drew him out, he won the tournament and won Angler of the Year that year too. And I saw it firsthand. I mean, I saw how he ran his water and how he worked the water, and how there were so many decisions that he would made that were just instinctual and intuitive, and there was no rhyme or reason about it. There was like a flow to these decision-making processes surrounding the environmental conditions that were going on at the time on the lake. And this is a lost art, guys. When you're talking about being able to read the sun and the wind and the light intensity and all the subtle clues that natures are giving you, that's a lost art. And a lot of the guys in the modern era of bass fishing today, they've lost that. They don't have those abilities to tap into those primal instincts that the guys that I listed on the top 5 here. You know, their strengths lie in other areas. Their strengths lie at idling for 6 hours a day and, you know, picking fish out with electronics. But their skills in the areas that I'm talking about that make people, in my opinion, a real bass angler, they simply haven't been developed. I mean, I don't think anybody could disagree with that. And I'm not saying that those guys are less for that. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's the reality of the situation. And in my opinion, there's a big difference between fishing and catching. Fishing should be just that. Fishing should be fishing. It's hunting, it's seeking, it's learning, it's absorbing information from nature the whole time out there. Catching, when you're catching, a lot of times, specifically if you're catching through the aid of electronics, it becomes a commercial venture, and fishing is no longer applicable there. Your techniques don't become as important. Your approaches and the subtle aspects of fishing are not as important as actually finding the obscure spots. Once you find those obscure spots, those fish are generally really easy to catch. So from that standpoint, that's why I picked out these guys as the top 5 real bass anglers in the history of the sport, in my opinion. So anyway, just a fun little video, guys. I'm not doing this to offend people. If some of you guys are bent out of shape for me not mentioning some of the guys that are the obvious stars today, that's why I did that. But if you guys got your own list, I'd be glad to hear them. Shoot them in the comment section and back it up why you think they are the greatest real bass fishermen in the country, and or in history. I'd be curious to hear. And that's my 5, and I gave you guys the reasons for that. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Just a nice little change of pace here. Like I said, thanks for tuning in, guys. Please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back soon. See you.